Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episodes of Lodestore's Landing Leaders. This week, joining us from the Matrix is Wes Williams, attorney at RELAW, APC advisor, all-around cryptocurrency subject matter expert. He's a member of the Government Blockchain Association, speaks about topics related to crypto, Bitcoin, blockchain, NFTs, all of the things we're going to get into today that everyone has probably heard thrown around, or you have your neighbor telling you about how much money they made trading Dogecoin or something like that. So there's a lot of things out there. So hopefully we can spend some time today kind of making it a little more approachable for everyone. And more importantly, talking about how it actually affects the real estate industry. And I know, Wes, in addition to being a subject matter expert, you're also a title agent, real estate attorney as well. So you're kind of coming from that frame of mind.
Right.
So anything I missed on that intro? How do you want to kind of start talking about, what's the best way to approach this? I think maybe with blockchain as our building block.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And the intro was perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've pretty much done all that. I still do.
Yeah. I was going to say you're my favorite type of podcast guest is someone who at some time has hosted a podcast like you did back in the day, because they, it's easy enough to talk to. So I'm excited for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. We back when I first got into it, I started learning about cryptocurrency in early 2017.
Mm-hmm.
When I noticed the price of Bitcoin going up, it was around that same time where I started connecting with other like-minded individuals, particularly in the legal space. Got together with some other attorneys to start today a crypto legal podcast. They discuss all the legal and regulatory issues that we started seeing come down as a result of this new technology.
Mm-hmm. And what do you say, as we start to get into this, what are some of the big misconceptions you see from especially folks in the title industry, maybe in their 40s, 50s, a little bit older generation?
Misconceptions in what respect? What do you mean?
Just what don't you understand? Maybe something like, Bitcoin being the same as crypto, or, assumptions about kind of the topic.
Okay. Yeah. Interestingly enough, when I first started speaking on this topic, I started speaking to Land Title Association.
Mm-hmm.
Land Title Association. It was in the early days of crypto. Still, in early 2017, it was just starting to kind of become the topic of interest in the title arena. And when I first started getting into crypto, because I had a title background, I had a lot of people in the blockchain space that would constantly tout that cryptocurrency blockchain is going to replace the need for title insurance. And
yeah,
I thought that was a ridiculous claim, because I know how title insurance works. I know why it's necessary here in the US. So, it would be different if, I can get into this, but it would be different if we had a state-run title guarantee system, kind of similar to Iowa, or something like a Torrens system. Blockchain would be perfect for that.
Right.
But it's a little bit different. And when you're dealing with a deeds-based system, and then you have title insurance involved as well.
Yeah. I had a friend of mine send me an article about blockchain and its applications 2 weeks ago. And it basically said title insurance is a sham and this is going to completely replace it. And he sent me the article and he said, well, they're not wrong. And I had to help myself from only responding like 3 paragraphs to him. But he's definitely going to be getting this link to this episode. So Mike, thank you for giving me a little bit of content there. So you had mentioned blockchain. I think that's a good place to start. So what is blockchain?
Right. And simply put, it's just basically a distributed database. Most ledger systems are centralized, where you have a company that kind of maintains their own database, and then they similar to how basically, if you read Satoshi's white paper, this was he invented this system to get around the need for banks to centralize their database, and they have to reconcile among other banks. In this way, it allows for the exchange of essentially digital ownership of an asset using cryptographic key pairs, and whereby you have a distributed database that comes to an agreement as to the state of the ledger. rather than you have one entity maintaining that ledger. So it's basically a way to kind of disintermediate that middleman, which was essentially the banking system. But that's Bitcoin. But I mean, there are other, when you're talking about blockchain, you have private blockchains that are kind of maintained by a small group of, individuals or entities, or you have a global network, kind of like the Bitcoin blockchain.
So you introduced a few topics there, and we'll talk about, instead of getting into crypto, we'll talk about this from the perspective of property records, right? So instead of having property records sitting at a recorder of deeds office somewhere, it's decentralized, you said, right? So that means that their records are going to be scattered across anyone who's a member of that blockchain.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, and even now, back when, okay, so back a few years ago, around 2017-ish timeframe, 2018, the Cook County Recorder of Deeds did a pilot program using the Bitcoin blockchain to record, they called them colored coins. It was kind of a way to distinguish the value transfer, basically, and put it on a blockchain, which was the Bitcoin blockchain. So they were able to record and record that interest on a blockchain, basically using a cryptographic hash that points back to an actual deed record. So they can go, okay, here now it's recorded onto a blockchain. We have that hash that points to this record. It's an actual deed, and then we can kind of track it from there. So people have been using blockchains, these global blockchains like the Bitcoin blockchain, Ethereum blockchain, to essentially record these interests. But the legal effect of them is questioned, because currently, when you think of real property law, it's at the state level, and unless the state has amended its legislation to allow constructive notice by way of a blockchain, recording on a blockchain is of no significance. You still have to record your interest in the county recorder office to avail yourself of the protections of the state when it comes to real property law. So you have that's a necessity. That's actual legislation, and we don't have that for blockchain yet.
And part of the way you describe it being decentralized, having a ledger, and that showing how it's connected, what the history of a given bit is. What is the appeal? Like, what's the appeal of storing a deed, a contract, a Bitcoin, whatever it may be, in this way, opposed to just having it all sit in a bank or a recorder of deeds office?
Right. So, as you know, there are issues when we record things at the county recorder's office, because anybody can go in and take a deed. It could be a forged document, and we have this all the time. And then they'll record that document. The county recorders, the recorder doesn't have any responsibility or liability to assess whether or not the deed is valid. That's what title companies do, right? They review the documents, they determine the validity, and then they issue an insurance policy that says, hey, we believe this transfer was valid. Or if they don't believe it's valid, they said, hey, provide us proof that it is a legitimate deed, and we'll give you an affidavit. And you have to, but so as far as the blockchain goes, there are issues, because it's the blockchain theoretically is an immutable ledger, whereby when something gets transferred on a blockchain, it's done, exactly. It's done instantaneous. It can't be rolled back. You can't change it. But things can undertake curative measures at the county recorder office with, by way of either, court action, where the court issues a judgment and says, okay, we believe title is as this says it is. If the parties, if somebody's if somebody's going to go ahead and file an action to confirm title, then that's what typically happens. Because our property law system is so robust in each of these states, we have the court to protect us from a lot of these issues when it comes to frauds and forgeries and things like that. When you're dealing with a decentralized blockchain like Bitcoin or Ethereum, and you're wanting to use a blockchain for this purpose, you're basically what the intention is in this decentralized networks is trying to kind of avail yourself of the the current legal system and make code law,
Mhm.
right? And they're still trying to deal with this. I mean, because a lot of times in these networks, you're dealing with anonymous individuals. I mean, or pseudonymous, because you're only looking at their public key address, which
Right.
is a string of letters and numbers.
Well,
You're
that's
not
part of the appeal, right? Information's anonymous. You're able to, information that could be very sensitive isn't there, which is also why Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are dangerous in many ways, because they can be used for illicit purposes because they can't be tracked, right? So now you're trying to do something that by nature is not anonymous. Who owns a given property?
Yeah, but even with that statement you just said, it wouldn't be wise to do that. Like it wouldn't be wise to say, for example, if you're going to engage in money laundering or things of that nature, because you can always trace. You can still go ahead and you can see the public, because you can review these on what's called a block explorer. So you go to a block explorer, you can track all the transactions back to the, theoretically what they call the Genesis block in Bitcoin.
Mhm.
You can trace all those transactions back to the Genesis block,
Yeah.
and you can see where that, who touched it. You don't know, you can't see their personal information, but
Right.
if you can trace it back to an IP address, you can more than likely find out who those individuals are.
Mhm.
So in my opinion, if you're laundering money through the, through the blockchain, is a very tricky situation. It might not be as easy as you think, and it might not be anonymous as you think. So that's the issue there. But when you're dealing with anonymous parties, in real estate, you're going to have to know who the parties are,
Right.
to a large extent. And title companies, if you're dealing with a title company or an escrow, they're going to ask for that information.
Mhm.
And if you're dealing with a banking institution, they're going to want to do,
Right.
KYC check, anti-money laundering checks, OFAC checks, everything.
Yeah.
So it's that this is where it gets kind of tricky
Mhm.
with implementing blockchain in real estate. Although listen, I'm a huge advocate of this technology, because I think, and this is another term that they might understand, smart contracts.
Right.
Ethereum is a global a network, kind of similar to blockchain. Excuse me, it's kind of similar to Bitcoin blockchain,
Right.
but it allows for what's called smart contracts. These automatic contracts. So I look at smart contracts kind of like an escrow, right?
Mhm.
There's conditions to an escrow, and once those conditions are met, the escrow officer takes,
Money changes hands.
money changes hands, the deeds change hands, things like that.
Mhm.
Smart contracts work the same way, but without a human element. Everything's done in code. It automatically. So once that condition is met, it triggers a counter performance automatically. And so that's why I think smart contracts will be very innovative moving forward as far as real estate goes, when it comes to transactions.
So it's sounding like the escrow process is one that might be a little more ripe for an application of blockchain than necessarily a chain of title.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But other countries are using other countries that don't have a robust land registry system like we have here in the US
Yeah.
are using blockchain they're kind of leapfrogging over what we have done and saying, okay, well, we'll just implement it because it's just a better technology, we think, and, that is immutable, and we can now, track ownership, property rights through this immutable ledger. And that's what they're doing. A lot of these countries are doing that now.
And the word immutable and unable to be changed has come up a lot. And that's always
Right.
one of the ideal attributes of blockchain that make people think about property records, right? So
exactly.
buy a house, get a property record on it. It's on the blockchain. Nothing changes for 12 years until I go and sell it, right?
Yeah.
But isn't that not really how everything works? What happens if someone gets something fraudulent on the blockchain, which can still happen, or if something just changes to my house over that time?
No, I agree with you. So it's for me, it's that old adage, garbage in, garbage out. If you're putting bad information on a blockchain, it's going to get stored permanently on a blockchain. So this is where it gets kind of tricky when you're dealing with real estate and blockchain applications, in my opinion. Somebody might have a different opinion, but hopefully, and I'm an advocate of human ingenuity and just the imagination of what humans have been able to come up with and figure out. So once we've and we're problem solvers, right? I mean, in general, if we see a problem, we're going to solve it. And I think eventually these nuanced issues will be solved, and we'll come up. I mean, hopefully we come up with a system that's maybe different than our current traditional title system. Who knows? You know, I'm optimistic.
Mm-hmm. And we talked a lot about blockchain, which is the underlying technology, and cryptocurrency. In the same way that you can build a property record or some sort of system on top of that, you build a currency system where everyone has bits of that currency. It's not sitting in a bank and they can exchange it for stuff.
Right. Exactly.
And I think that's an area that is probably more widely publicized right now in terms of all of the different types of coins out there, all of the currencies. That's when you hear Ethereum, Bitcoin, Dogecoin, and I don't know, your mom's coin or whatever the heck's out there, right? There's thousands of them. One thing that I think is causing an intersection of also the mortgage industry with this is now people are trading these or putting money in these. So these are legitimate assets that people have. There's an article I saw that someone had $100,000 from crypto trading, right? That's an asset now that he can borrow money against. So now, even if you're not, doing a mortgage in Bitcoin or anything like that, you have to start dealing with this in a way. So I think it's getting closer and closer and closer to the industry. Are there other ways you see or kind of beginning to see them intersect?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when you're talking about cryptocurrencies, there are many of them. And this is where I think a lot of these issues are these underlying regulatory and legal issues come up, because here's the thing. I think at the outset, when I started, my journey into this technology, and in this whole area in general, it was in early 2017, and this is when the what's called the ICO boom happened. It was called the initial coin offering. It was just kind of a term that the industry adopted, kind of a take on the IPO, and so they used them a lot for capital raising. To kickstart their ventures, and the ultimate goal in some of these, I mean, some of them were scams, a lot of them were scams, but some of them were legitimate, companies wanting to build something, that was unique and potentially disruptive. But what happened was that a lot of what they were issuing were what looked a lot like securities or investment contracts, and the SEC got involved and said, "Hey, this is what you just issued are securities. You haven't registered these with us, and you're selling them to the general public, and you're doing it in a way that violates securities laws." And so a lot of these companies got nailed with enforcement actions, and they were cease and desist orders. So so this is where it's big now regarding the classification of these tokens. And Ethereum and Bitcoin essentially got a pass from the SEC, because a few years ago they had a Commissioner Hinman came out and said these blockchains were sufficiently decentralized that essentially they were outside of the purview of the SEC's regulatory authority. They're more akin to, we see them as commodities or property, and therefore they would probably fall under the CFTC's purview, regulatory purview. So from the regulatory and legal perspective, that's still an issue. I mean, even today with stable coins, right? And these stable coins arguably would fall outside the Howey test. And I'm not going to get into what the Howey test was. It was an old case law that kind of laid out the elements of what's considered an investment contract. Yeah. And if you hit all those elements, you're dealing with an investment contract, therefore it's a security, therefore it's subject to SEC regulation. So, but basically what stable coins are, they're trying to be similar to what the US dollar is, in that it's using the blockchain plumbing system, and it is allowing for these instantaneous settlements and immutable settlements on a blockchain, but they're redeemable one-to-one for the dollar, but they're privately issued. And so what's happened?
Dollar.
Yep. What's happened with those things is that there's questions as to, whether or not these private entities should be regulated kind of similar to banks, right? I mean, they're custodying a lot of dollars, and then they're, as far as reporting requirements go, I mean, Tether is, one of the ones that has been nailed by the New York Attorney General, as well. I mean, as well as I think a number of other regulators have come after them. I mean, they're not essentially. I mean, you can argue that they're not backed 1-to-1 with a dollar, because they even say that they, what's on their, essentially what they've got backing it are a debt in some instances. So but there's a few of them that try to have complied with U.S. regulations like USDC, and then a few other, Paxos, I believe, too.
There seems to be a murky area where there's these cryptocurrencies can be used as a way of transmitting dollars pretty efficiently, right?
Correct.
Or now they're becoming securities and investments in their own right, and those are two very, very different things.
Correct. So I think that's where the real estate industry, at least the title insurance industry, has been having problems with it, because if you've seen a lot of the press out lately, people either are wanting to purchase real estate with cryptocurrency or have done it, but these articles have been a little misleading in that they really haven't purchased.
They just convert to dollars.
They convert to US dollars and they settle it out the traditional way. And there are intermediary partners that will allow for this exchange to happen, and they're out there. And
one of the problems is just the volatility of those cryptocurrencies.
Correct.
Of doing that.
Correct. Which is why I think stable coins will play a huge part. Once we get the regulatory certainty and clarity out of the way, the issues out of the way, I think stable coins, and even potentially, central bank digital currencies as well, will play a large role in the future when it comes to real estate settlements, because we won't be utilizing the SWIFT system and wire transfers, because
SWIFT is a current banking system, and one thing that comes under play a lot is it's a way of banks exchanging money, and it's slow.
Correct. Yeah. And we've even in our industry, we have a lot of wire fraud issues. I think blockchain and the way you can trace the funds, via a block explorer will settle and handle a lot of these issues when it comes to wire fraud.
And you would mention, so you actually started answering the question I was about to ask of applications that you do see in the industry for blockchain that seem to make sense. And I think the, wire fraud and confirming information like that and securing the transaction seems to be one of them.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah. And even real estate investments. I mean, tokenization has been a big use case application when it comes to real estate, blockchain, crypto in the real estate space. What people and companies have been doing is, deeding their property into a special purpose vehicle like an LLC or a land trust or a limited partnership type entity. And then what they've done is they've fractionalized, created a token where they can sell fractional ownership interest in these real estates. Then again, it becomes, is it a security? More than likely.
It's like
you have to register with the SEC.
Yeah,
exactly. And private REITs are doing that too. I mean, you're going to see a lot more private REITs doing the same thing. And you're going to see a lot of a lot of exchanges that are going to be selling these tokenized assets on them as well.
Now you can buy 100th of a rental complex or something.
Correct.
Like that. And if you're going to build a rental complex, you can get a bunch of smaller investors in, opposed to trying to find one or two big investors.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
And quite frankly, that doesn't sound like a bad thing to me. Until people start to lose money or people get scammed, or just like anything else. Like, I'm sure there seems to be just a heavy amount of pros and cons.
And that's the fine line that we're dealing with here. I mean, because what's innovative too is DeFi, decentralized finance, where it's more difficult to regulate because you're dealing with, global networks, multiple parties that kind of maintain that network, and there's no really central point of attack. There's no centralized entity that you can kind of point to, that you can, bring an enforcement action against. So that's more difficult. So, I know it's got to, regulators like the SEC, the CFTC, and a few others have been, I'm sure they're pulling their hair out. How are we going to regulate this?
Yeah.
Is there some concerted effort we need to do? Do we need to, do we need legislative change? And I think we do. I mean, to a large extent, and I've seen regulators out there trying to kind of, our elected officials trying to kind of figure out from at the federal and state level, how do we rein this in? How do we regulate it? How do we protect consumers? What do we do? How do we do this? And so they're trying to figure it out. And so, but I think they're doing it in a way where they're going, at least the SEC is, bringing enforcement actions and not really bringing clarity and working with these participants is that how can we do this in a way that is regulated, that does protect consumers, where we can actually run a functioning business and we're not pushing, this innovative technology off into other jurisdictions that are more favorable to crypto and blockchain.
Right. Do you think there will be a tipping point from a legislative perspective of, someone suing over a valid sale of a home on crypto, where, what will that tipping point be where there's a lawsuit and it swings one way or the other that is going to kind of push that adoption? Yeah,
you're seeing a lot of lawsuits now that have been filed that are trying to clarify some of these issues. But from a real estate perspective, once you start seeing more mass adoption and tokenization of these assets, you're going to start seeing lawsuits. It's inevitable. And ultimately the courts in these, state jurisdictions are going to have to, come to a decision that ultimately will become precedent. And it's kind of like a wait and see. I mean, I don't know how they're going to treat a lot of this stuff, but, from a state law perspective, but it's going to be interesting to find out because it's going to happen. And so you're going to be dealing with I don't know. I mean, you're going to be dealing with a lot of issues that are going to be very nuanced and it's very specialized.
Right.
So,
and most judges aren't going to have, the
you're going to be a lot of expert witnesses.
Yeah.
That you're going to need to kind of extract a lot of these nuanced.
Well, it sounds like you have your next gig ready to go then.
Well, the funny thing is there are a lot of brilliant attorneys now, particularly ones that have been practicing in the securities law space for a while, in the banking space for a while now, that have, kind of developed a reputation as being the go-to individuals, to kind of deal with these issues. I don't know many that are kind of that have the real estate background that I do, or the title insurance background, but I see applications, in those spaces. So ultimately there will be legal issues that do come up, and if hopefully these individuals come to me if they have issues.
I mean, it sounds like it's such a fast moving area. You talk about, the early days only 4 or 5 years ago in 2017. So it's going to be interesting. If last question I have for you, if someone wants to educate themselves on this, learn more about it, what would you recommend in terms of some resources for that, other than listening to our podcast? Yeah.
So when I first got into this space in early 2017, there were no resources really. I mean, very little. Yeah. They had some podcasts on YouTube. YouTube has been kind of funny about, crypto content, but I mean, you still find a lot on YouTube if you want to just, if you're a video watcher and you like consuming information, in that way. Thank goodness now there's a lot of resources online. You can you read about, there are industry newsletters, Cointelegraph and a few other ones out there. But I mean, the information's out there. What's cool about too, like if you're a newbie, if you want to download like a Coinbase wallet, I mean, Coinbase is a centralized exchange. You'll learn about centralized versus decentralized wallets and whatnot. But Coinbase is good because you download their wallet and they have a section for news articles that's all related to crypto.
They're a publicly traded company.
They're a publicly traded company now. So it's yes. I mean, and that see, and then it all comes down to trust, really. I mean, some people don't trust private companies. They don't trust the government. What they'll do is they'll more along the lines of holding their crypto in like a cold storage wallet. They don't, they don't use a centralized wallet exchange. They'll use maybe Uniswap, which is a decentralized exchange. You'll learn about all these things too. I mean, it's a very interesting area, and it's you have to keep up with it or you
Yeah.
will be left behind, really. It's
Yeah,
but
I think there
ultimately,
were about 3 other questions we're not even going to have the time to get to in terms of the types of applications.
oh my, it's insane.
And
There's so much
everywhere. Yeah.
Oh, there's so much to this,
Mhm.
but I do see. But here's the thing: I do see the title insurance industry adopting this at some point, at least when it comes to the settlements. If people want to, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm full disclosure. I'm working with there's a company that I'm working with that is building out custodial wallets for the title insurance industry, specific for the title insurance industry, that makes it look similar to a trust account. But basically, you'll be accepting a stable. The title company will accept a stable coin. They will settle out in a stable coin, and they'll distribute it to the counterparties to the transaction. So, I mean, imagine if you were at this point, obviously, I don't know if lenders right now will accept it, or even taxing authorities will accept crypto, and they will download a wallet. But you may see, at the early stages, real estate agents and brokers accepting their commission in a stable coin.
I was about to say, or earnest money at the beginning of the process.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then the title company will be settling out in a stable coin. And then all the benefits of settling in a stable coin, you don't have to worry about wire transfer cutoff times. You can really settle at any time. And then you can see it on the
block. Worry about someone sending an email, hey, change the wiring instructions.
No, you don't. Yeah. You don't. Yeah, because they've downloaded a custodial. Yeah. So they're all and then the way it's being set up is we're dealing with crypto banks, and the crypto banks will essentially be the custodians.
Yeah.
Because they have the license to do that. Basically, they're a charter to do that.
Mm-hmm. So then, as that changes, then in 10, 20 years, what does a title agent's job look like? How is it different than it is today? Are there parts of their job they're not doing anymore? Maybe confirmation of some of that information?
You know what? It's difficult to say, because at this point, it's not just blockchain when you think about it. I mean, you have companies like Doma out there that are building AI software that are kind of streamlining the search and exam process. Yeah. So search exam process may change with as this technology becomes more robust. Do I see a complete displacement of humans? Maybe not until further down, until AI is more it's more smarter, right? I mean, and that's in a whole nother rabbit hole you can go down, is how AI is going to change the industry. But between blockchain and AI, I think at some point the industry will change. To what extent it's going to be a complete change, I don't know, because you still have a lot of states out there that are still attorney driven. They have their own nuanced closing issues.
They have township specific offices in some states, never mind in the 21st century, or being stuck in the 20th century, they're in the 19th century. So I think we do have a ways to go, but sometime between now and the robots taking over, we're going to have to pick your brain again about all these things going on. So I really do appreciate your time and coming on today. Is there anything else you want to plug or address before we wrap up?
No, I'm good. Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on. I love talking about this stuff. I can continue to go on and on about this.
No, this was great. I mean, you take something like property record law and securitization, you make it, interesting, I think. So I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time, Wes.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it.
Everyone. Have a good one.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Lodestar's Lending Leaders. I'd like to give a special thanks to Brian Rieger and Elena Gardner, who help us create this podcast every week. Please remember to like and subscribe the podcast wherever you listen to it. It helps us a lot. Thanks. Talk to you next week.